Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm Leslie with the New Mexico Small Business Development Center, and I'm here to present Eric Spellman. He is a public speaker extraordinaire, and he's going to talk to us. Oh, sorry about that. Let me turn that off real quick. He's going to talk to us about the secret to pickingagood.com. I want to remind everyone that the New Mexico Small Business Development Center encourages New Mexico small businesses to learn about cybersecurity and protect them and their business from cybersecurity risks. We do have one more cybersecurity webinar coming up next week, Cybersecurity Basics for Your Small Business. You can also pick up Eric Spellman's pre-recorded on-demand webinar, Top 10 Mistakes Hackers Want You to Make. So look for that on our website. I'm going to turn it over to Eric. Remember, type your questions in the Q&A. He gets lots of questions and he picks them all up and answers them. Eric?
Okay, well, this is going to be an important subject because if I get a lot of questions, it's always on pickinga.com. And folks, it's not as easy as you think, nor should it be. So be sure and ask your questions. Now, the other thing I kind of have to tell you, I guarantee I'm going to be stepping on some of your toes today because a lot of you have already picked your domain name, your .com, the last two pieces of an address, the something.com or something.org or something.net. That's called a domain name, okay? And I guarantee I'm going to step on some toes. So please just keep listening. And also remember, you can always choose a new .com, okay? We'll talk about how that's possible in just a minute. So let's talk about the secret to pickingagood.com. Well, the key is to understand the history, how all of this began. Most people don't realize that the military actually created the internet. And back then it was not called the internet, it was called the Milnet. It was in the early 70s, believe it or not, when the Milnet was around. Now, the thing about it was computers were kind of networked back then. And remember, computers filled entire rooms back then. My phone is a more powerful computer than the room-sized ones that existed back then. But the point was, we had major computer systems at all the military bases and wherever we had nuclear weapons. Now, the government was worried that in the event of a nuclear war, if a nuclear war happened and one of our bases was destroyed, we didn't want the entire network going down. So they had to create a self-healing network of computers. And what I mean by that is that, and the internet works this way today, is that if one site goes down on the internet, all the traffic automatically reroutes around it. Kind of like putting up orange cones on the road, and then everyone just goes around it. It doesn't stop all the traffic. It may slow it, but it just redirects. And so it's impossible, hear me, it is impossible to take the entire internet down. Even if you took half of it down, the rest would continue to work, and it would attempt to get around any kind of blockages that are. So keep in mind, the reason the internet is so strong today is because the military designed it to withstand a nuclear attack. But then the network expanded because the military, a lot of the research being done for the military was being done at major universities. So the Milnet started connecting into universities. And as the number of computers on the Milnet continued to grow, well, they had to come up with a way of being able to tell one server from another, one computer from another. Because think about it, if information is going to travel over the internet, it has to know where it's going. Kind of like your home address, there is no other home address in the world like it. Your home address may be 4414 Kingston Street, Amarillo, Texas, 79109. That's your address. There are no two addresses like that on the planet. And that's how the mail gets routed to you. Well, the same exists for servers. When you pull up yahoo.com or CNN.com or FoxNews.com or whatever. When you pull that up, how does the internet know where to go to get that information? Well, that's because every computer on the planet, including the one you're using now, has to have a unique address, and the address is numerical. It's made up of 4 sets of 3-digit numbers, and we call those addresses an internet protocol address, but we usually shorten that to IP address. Okay, so an IP address is a numerical. It looks something like this. Actually, it looks exactly like that, and there's a dot separating each piece. Don't worry, I'm not going to get all technical about that. Just understand that your computer right now, your phone right now, whatever you're using to zoom into this, actually has one of those addresses, and no one else on the planet has that address. That's how Zoom knows where to send this little class, is because it knows you're at that address. But here's the problem. People can't remember those numbers. I mean, it's almost like a phone book. It's almost like phone numbers, you know? If, I want to go to Eric's website. Oh, I need to go to 256.35.20. Who can remember that? No one. So what we did was we came up with an easy way to assign something more easy to remember to that numeric address, and it's called a domain name. Well, in the very beginning, a domain name, like I said earlier, a domain name is the something dot something at the very end of the address, okay? It's just 2 pieces, something dot something. That's a domain name. Now you can put other stuff in front of it, like www.something.com or whatever, but the last 2 pieces are what we call the domain name, okay? Now, at the very end of the domain name is what we call the domain name extension. In other words, that last piece, like .com, that's a domain name extension. Well, in the very beginning, there was no .com. Did you know that? In the very beginning, there was only .mil, which I'm sure you can guess was military. And also keep in mind, this was United States only. No other country had access to this internet, okay? Just the United States. And so in the beginning, all the addresses were .mil. And then when colleges came on board, they added a new one to separate military sites from colleges. And so they created .edu. So whenever you see .edu, that means a college or a university, higher learning. It doesn't mean like middle school or elementary school or high school. Doesn't mean those at all. EDU is pretty much, not pretty much, it is just colleges and universities. Then when the public got access to the internet, which is what the MilNet eventually turned into, when normal people like you and me got access to it, some new domain name extensions came out. One of them was .net. Now in the beginning, .net meant a network provider. So your internet service provider, whoever that was, Suddenlink, AT&T, however you were getting your internet, they typically ended in .net. The goal was you could look at an address and kind of tell who had it, and different categories of businesses were in there. Then came along .com. Now, no one saw it coming, but .com means a commercial business. That's all it means. And when .com hit, all of a sudden there was a rush on registering .coms. So much so that we pretty much ran out. It's not that we ran out of every possible combination. We ran out of all the good ones. And so that's when .net became available. That's when .org became available, because in the beginning, .org was could only be done by nonprofits. They had .orgs, and churches were .orgs as well. Well, because .com got so full, they eventually opened up .net and .org, so that for-profit companies could have those as well. So the rules have gotten really lax. The rules have really softened up since all of this began. And so, yeah, you'll see businesses with .nets, you'll see businesses with .orgs, but primarily you're going to see .com. Now, what about the rest of the world? You see, when we created the internet, we also wanted to be able to connect it to the rest of the world. But how did we get all the traffic to Australia to go to Australia? Well, instead of .com at the end, we put a .au. And you got to realize that every country on the planet, all 200 and so odd, what is it? How many countries are there? Like 200, 250? All the countries in the world got assigned by the Internet Name Assignment Group a 2-digit abbreviation for their country. So AU is Australia, UK is United Kingdom, DE, anyone know that one? It's short for Deutschland. It's Germany. So DE is Germany. And so every country got their own. And what countries could do after then was they, before the dot, say DE, they could put a .co, and that was their way of saying commercial. And so if you ever saw an address that ended in .co.de, that was a commercial German company. Now, some of y'all are probably thinking, how come all of our addresses don't have a .us at the end? Well, believe it or not, there actually is a .us extension. It does exist, and the rest of the world wishes we would follow the rules. But, and I'm not kidding here, because we created the internet, we'll do whatever we want. It really is that case. And so our addresses don't have to end in .us. However, you will see .us addresses out there. And where you'll see them is in state and local governments. Also, elementary, middle school, and high schools use them. Now, it's kind of relaxed a little to where they can kind of use .coms as well, but officially, most schools and governments end in .us. Okay. So let's jump on. Let me just tell you right now, despite all that history I just gave you, and despite all the rules that were set up, .com is all that matters. I'll just tell you that right now. And if you're someone who has a .net, I've heard this 1,000 times. My competitor got the perfect .com, so I got the .net version. Oh my gosh. Don't ever do that. Don't you ever do that. I'm telling you, everyone assumes .com. So if your address ends in .net, you can tell them .net till you're blue in the face, and they'll still type in .com. And if your competitor grabbed the .com and you grab the .net, guess what? When you tell people to go to .net, guess where they're going to go? To .com. You're actually sending people to your competitor. Don't ever, if you are a commercial company, choose .net or .org, because everyone assumes .com. Okay? It's one of the biggest mistakes I see people make. Good example of this. Do y'all remember whitehouse.com? In the beginning of the internet, the official White House site is what? Whitehouse.gov. And .gov is also kind of a federal extension for government. .gov. Well, there were some people who went out and registered whitehouse.com. And if you ever went to whitehouse.com, you discovered it was a porn site. And like I said, it just proved my point. You can tell people .gov all day long, but when they typed in White House, what do they put? .com. Now, don't worry, that little problem was rectified a long time ago. But I still see it happen today. Okay? Any questions so far? Feel free to ask at any point. Here's another rule where I'm going to step on some of your toes. Don't you ever use hyphens, a dash in your .com. It is technically allowed. It really is. I mean, you can register a .com that contains dashes in, hyphens, but no one remembers them. And what ends up happening is when you're on the phone and you're trying to tell someone to go to your website, if you put dashes in there, you have to tell them, oh, there's a dash. Like on mine, ericspellman.com, I could have put a dash between Eric and Spellman, but then I would have had to tell people, don't forget there's a dash between those two words. So I just tell them ericspellman.com and they just go there. Because most people assume you can just squish the words together with no spaces and it works. But if you put a dash in there, you're going to have to tell people every time. Just don't do it. It's just going to be a hassle and you're going to send people to the wrong website a whole bunch of times. Also realize it doesn't have to be your name. Now, this is one of the big ones, and I've run into this a lot from a lot of the local businesses here. Your domain name doesn't have to be the name of your business. Good example, law firms. Here in Amarillo, there used to be a law firm named Peterson, Ferris, Stories, and Jones. And so what did they do? They went out and registered this, Peterson, Ferris, Stories, Jones.com. How many people do you think could type that in correctly the first time? I'm waiting. None. None. It was the worst choice. You're saying, but that was the name of their business. Right, but no one can type it in. I would rather have it be short and easy to read than long and hard to spell. You see what I'm saying? I'd rather it be short. And so take a look at that. And so what I'm trying to say with all of this, it doesn't have to be your company name. It could also be what you do. It could be the product you make. It could be the service you offer. It can be anything. It doesn't have to be your name. So in this particular case, you know, I might have recommended, and I'm sure this is already taken, but I might have recommended getmeoutofjail.com. That's easier to remember than Peterson, Ferris, Stories, Jones.com. Okay. I'm telling you, choosing a .com is not as easy as you think. And some people don't discover the mistake they've made until after they've made it. And you're about to see some examples of those. So a lot of times we run into problems with the owner of the company. The owner of the company will, they will demand that it be their name. They will demand that it be, you know, the name of the company for branding. But if the name of your company is easily misspelled, don't do it. Like I said, it must be easy to say, no spelling necessary. I need to be, if you want to know what a good .com is, it's one that you can give over the phone once without spelling it. Like I said, I would rather it be longer, but have easy to spell words than shorter and you have to spell it out every time. Okay. So remember that. And also look at your own domain name and see if it's following any of these rules. Good example of this is the pest guy. This actually happened. And he was one of my customers when I built his website. And the name of his service was Faulkner Pest Service. So when he came in and talked to me about a website, he also wanted me to register his .com. And he wanted FaulknerPestService.com. But as you can see, that's kind of difficult. And who can spell Faulkner? Okay. I like to tell people this. You got to realize that everyone you talk to on average is operating at about a 7th grade reading level. Okay. About a 7th grade reading level. And not everyone knows how to spell. Now, if that is your name, Faulkner, of course you know how to spell it. It's your name, but no one else does. And so I convinced him not to use that. And he goes, well, Eric, what do I do? That's the name of my company. What do I do? So I sat and thought and thought and thought. And I came up with TexasBugKillers.com. He loved it. He put it on his vehicles. And I'm telling you, his website traffic just went exponentially crazy. Because think about it. I want you to look at that. TexasBugKillers.com. It's what they do. It's easy to spell. I only have to say it over the phone once. And like I said, I don't have to spell it at all. I hope that, like I said, I hope you understand this. It does not have to be the name of your company. It can be what you do. Your domain also needs to be easy to read. And what I mean by that is like when you print them, like when you print a business card, like you see here, or when you put it on a billboard or a banner at a sporting event, wherever you put your .com, you've got to write it in such a way that it's easy to read. And to that end, you need to remember that domains are case insensitive. It's not like a password where uppercase and lowercase make a difference. No, it doesn't matter with domain names. You can type them in uppercase, lowercase. It doesn't matter. You'll still go to the same place. So what I tell people to do, and pull out your business card right now. Go ahead and pull your own business card out right now because I want you to look at it. I'll wait. Pull out your business card. And when you do, hopefully you've got either your web address and or your email address on there. And I want you to see if you followed my advice. So take a look. A lot of people will simply put their web address in all lowercase, ericspellman.com. Well, that's okay. And I read it easily because I can break it apart. I mean, or I could do uppercase. And some people would say, well, that's easier to read. But I'm here to tell you, if your addresses are in all lowercase, if they're in all uppercase, it doesn't matter. It'll still get there. But here's the deal. Those are hard to read. If your address is in all lowercase, if it's all in uppercase, it is difficult to read. The next time you have cards printed, the next time you print pamphlets or whatever it is that's going to have your domain name on it, you need to use mixed case. Believe it or not, this actually works. See what I did? Every other letter. And that's almost impossible to read, isn't it? But when you capitalize the first letter of each word, look, compare that to the others. And you will see that this one, where I've capitalized the first letter of each word, basically what it does, what mixed case does, is it provides mixed elevations on the letters. So your eye, when it's looking at it, can more easily break it apart into pieces, specifically breaking it into the pieces you want. Okay? And like I said, they can type it in that way or any of the ways above and it will still work. The only reason we're doing this is for when you print them on your business cards, is for when you put them on a banner, is for when you put them in a pamphlet or even on the sign in your store. Okay? And so I like to capitalize the first letter of each word. And trust me, the eye can more easily group letters together to make words. But when they're all uppercase, there's no mixed elevation. Your eyes have to work harder to separate it. Same with lowercase. Same goes for email. If you're ever going to print your email, I would do the same thing. I would capitalize the first letter of each word because email, it doesn't matter how I type in your email address, it'll still get there. This way, it just becomes easier to read. I hope you're ready. We're going to have some fun. But I'm going to go ahead and give you a warning. Some of what you're about to see is for mature audiences. Okay? So I've told you, I've warned you, but you're going to find that it's fairly funny. A lot of people have inadvertently chosen bad domain names. In other words, they thought it was a good idea until they wrote it down. And a lot of these people never wrote it down. They actually, in fact, every one of these, I kid you not, I've got about 10 of them I'm going to show you. None of these are just jokes that never happened. Every single one of these was a real domain name. And they had to change it once they saw what was going on. I'll give you an example. There was a company called American Scrap Metal. Okay. Well, they wanted AmericanScrapMetal.com. And of course, it looks like American's Crap Metal. Okay. Because that's the way the human eye breaks it apart. See, this also kind of goes towards the whole capitalize the first letter of each word. That might have helped in this case. But to be honest, that is a very poor domain name. because of how the human eye will, by default, break it apart. Oh, trust me, these get worse. How about the budget rent-a-car in the Cook Islands? Now remember, every country has a extension, and the Cook Islands, their extension is .ck. And remember, what you do is you put, the way other countries showed that it's a commercial site, is they put something in front of it. Let me see the question. Oh, okay. Okay, so in this particular case, they totally regret this. It was budget.co.ck. I'm not even going to say this one, but I'm here to tell you, Budget Rent-A-Car truly realized they made a mistake and they changed it. Kids Exchange is equally worse. It's a place where, you know, people can buy kids clothing, used kids clothing, right? Sounds great. But when you do kidsexchange.com, yeah, you see how the human eye breaks it apart. You know, kidsexchange.net. Once again, you got to be careful, people. Hey, how about the North of Boston Jewish Singles website? And I'm telling you, every one of these is real. And they really had a website. Theirs ended up as nobjs.com. I told you this was mature. I'm just telling you that was a major mistake, and they could have avoided that mistake had they simply written it down first. Oh, wait, there's more. How about Pen Island? That was the name of their company. They make custom pens, and a lot of you have already figured out where this one's even going. Okay, penisland.net. Speed of Arts. Now, this one is pretty funny. They're a company that kind of did custom t-shirts, and it was called Speed of Arts. But when they got speedofarts.com, it looks like speedofarts.com. How about Teachers Talking? Sounds like a great place for teachers to get together and discuss things. Well, when they registered it, you spell it, it looks like teacherstalking.com. Oh, and this one, my final one. Who Represents turns into whorepresence.com. So I'm pleased, and this actually happened in Amarillo. I'm telling you, not that one, but I did have one. It was called Children's Exchange here in Amarillo. And when you write it down, childrensexchange.com, it looks like childrensexchange.com. And she never realized it until she wrote it down. People, you got to realize how the human mind works. When it looks at one of these, it tries to break it apart into words. And your mind, I'm not saying you automatically go there, but you do. And you're just asking for a lot of grief, a lot of giggles, and your competitors will make fun of you. And it's not the kind of exposure that you want. So please be careful when choosing your .com. Write it down in all uppercase and all lowercase. Make sure that there's no possible way it can be confused for something else. Now, you can also assign a nickname, okay? Now, a nickname is like having more than one .com. You know, the way to think about it is there's two types of .coms. There is an authoritative .com and there's a redirected .com, okay? Let me explain, because I don't want you to think this is all getting technical here. The authoritative one is your real name. Like, think of your name. You have a legal name and you might have a nickname, and everyone might call you by your nickname because it's easier than saying your legal name. But when you sign a document, you always use what? Your legal name. It is the first name. It is the one name that points to your website, that points to, it is your main name. Does that make sense? That's the authoritative name. Think of it like your legal name. Redirected is like a nickname. In other words, if you type the nickname in, it'll also go to the same site. It'll kind of redirect them. That's what it does. It redirects people back to the authoritative website. So it's like more than one way to get to your website. Back in the day, during the big .com boom, the bubble, if you will, um, Google actually kind of looked at domain names importantly. In other words, they would rank you higher if your domain name had certain keywords in it. If the keywords people were searching on was your domain name, like usedcars.com. So maybe Chevy had Chevy.com, but then they went out and bought usedcars.com. Well, guess what? Usedcars.com, Google would give that extra bonus points. And if someone typed in used cars in Google's, guess where it went? It went to usedcars.com. So everyone started buying up a whole bunch of domain names, hundreds in some cases, that were all pointed back to the main website of these companies. And what these people were seeing was that Google was giving them credit for that. Well, Google quickly realized people were abusing that. So that stopped. So now having multiple domain names pointed to your website or buying all the domain names out there, it does not help you one iota. It does not help you whatsoever. The only thing Google looks at is your authoritative domain name. So if you were lucky enough to get usedcars.com, then yeah, that truly will help you, but only if it's your legal name. The advantage of nicknames, though, or redirected domains, is that they create multiple paths. So they can also help with misspellings. So for instance, Microsoft went out and registered like Office, Office.com, MicrosoftOffice.com, Office365.com, and they registered all those and pointed them back to where they talk about Microsoft Office. Now, a good example with me, and this actually came up in the place, is that most people don't realize, my name, Eric Spellman, they don't realize that Spellman has two N's at the end. It's a German spelling. So Spellmann. Most people don't know that. So what I did was I went and registered the misspelling of my own name and just pointed it to my main one. And you'd be surprised, I got 25% more traffic when I did that. And that's because everyone was misspelling my name, trying to find me. So what I did was I just bought up all the misspellings. And a lot of companies do that. If your domain name is easily misspelled, see, my authoritative one is the correct one, Eric Spellman with 2Ns.com. That is my authoritative one. But I have some other domains that point to it also. And like I said, one of them is the misspelling of my name. So think about all the different ways people would misspell your .com. And if you can, go out and grab those as well and simply point them at the main website. Because I'm here to tell you, when someone types in your name and doesn't know how to spell, if they can't get to you, they're going to assume you just went out of business. And that's the last thing you need. We're going to spend a little time here because you need to understand the legal side of all of this. Okay. There is a legal side to domain names, as you can well guess. As people were registering .coms, there were fights over that. But let's talk about how the registration process works. You see, what most people don't realize is that you kind of really don't own that domain name, okay? You simply have a right to use it. It's kind of like the address to your house, okay? You don't own that address. When you move, the address stays there. That address is assigned to that place. It's not assigned to you. Now, if you're living there, yeah, that's your address. But if you ever move, that becomes someone else's address. Think of it like that. It's kind of like checking out a library book. As long as you have it, it's in your possession. You can read it. No one can stop you. But then you check it back in. So you need to realize that you only have a domain name for as many years as you register it for. Now, these days, you can get a domain name for like $5 a year. And so what happens is people go in and fill it out and they own the right to use that domain name for as many years as they paid for it. Now, the people they do this with is called a domain registrant, okay, or registrar, sorry, a domain registrar. The biggest one out there, you'll recognize them, is GoDaddy, GoDaddy.com. They're the biggest domain registrar out there. And they basically represent, they can register just about anything. Now, they can't register .edu, they can't register .mil, military, they can't register .gov, and because there's other entities that do that. But what GoDaddy and other commercial registrars can do is they can register .coms, .nets, .orgs, and there's a whole host of others, okay? Because they've just kind of expanded it now. You know, we were running out of .coms. So what they did was they opened it up to others like .biz, B-I-Z, and some others. So the key is, do you know who registered your domain name? That's what I'm really getting down to. Who is your domain registered to? Whose name is it in? Because here's the deal. If it ain't in your name, then you're not controlling it, and you could lose it. You're saying, how do I find out, Eric? How do I find out? Well, what you need to realize is that when you register a .com or a .net or .org or whatever, there are 3 people that get registered in that record. There are 3 people listed in that record. One of them is the administrative contact. The administrative contact is the legal owner, if you will. I don't like using the word owner because you don't own a domain name, but they're the person who can make all the decisions for it. They're the person that GoDaddy thinks is in charge. They're the person who's going to be asked, do you want to make this change or not? The administrative contact is the person, or it's the person in charge of making all decisions based on whether you keep that domain name, sell it, release it, whatever. It's called the administrative contact. And I'm here to tell you, you had better be that person, not your web designer. The technical contact that's where your web designer or your web host might go. In other words, if there's a technical issue with your .com, then GoDaddy or whoever could email the technical person and say, go fix it. But the technical contact does not own the domain name. They don't control it. They can't give it away or sell it. They're just a technical contact. They're contacted with tech support. The third one is called the billing contact. If you haven't paid your bills to GoDaddy, or if you haven't paid your bills to whoever you registered your domain through, then this is where those late notices would go. And it's the billing contact. So you see, there's 3. You, as a business owner, need to be the administrative contact. Let me tell you what happens. A lot of times you may go to a web designer and you may say, hey, I need a website. And can you see if this .com is available? And they go and say, yeah, it's available. Want me to register for you? And what did you say? Sure. And that's the last you heard of it. Not all of a sudden your domain worked. All of a sudden .com worked. You're getting email there. Go to your website. It just works. And you didn't think twice about it. But here's the deal. There are web designers out there who will put their own name in the administrative contact. Did you hear me? They will put their own name, not yours, in the administrative contact, which means legally they're the only ones who can make decisions about it. Your web designer, if they have to have any kind of connection to your domain name, needs to be technical or billing, okay? But never, ever, ever let them be the administrative contact. Now, if I suddenly made you nervous, good. What you need to do if you don't know this for sure, there used to be a way called a who is search, and you might try it. Who is, WHOIS, like who is this? Like whois.godaddy.com. And that was a way to look up who the registrars are. But GoDaddy and a lot of other registrars now, because of all the spam that was being created, now allow private registrations. And so most when people register most, they're private. So there's only two ways you're going to find out. You either need to have your login to your GoDaddy account, and I'm here to tell you, your .com needs to be in your own GoDaddy account, or whoever your registrar is. In other words, you need a login, a username and password to get in there and mess with it. Okay. If you let it be under your web designer's account, there is a way to transfer them around, but keep in mind, as long as it's under your registrar or your web host or web designer's account, they're kind of in charge of it. Folks, you need to find out if you're the administrative contact. And I highly recommend that it not just be an employee. I recommend it be the owner of the company, because of all the people, you're going to be the one that doesn't leave or get fired. Think about it. You don't want to make the administrative contact someone who could get fired or quit. It needs to be the owner of the company. Okay. So if you don't know, you need to find out, and you need to ask your web designer, and you need proof. And the easiest way to get proof is to get access to that account, your GoDaddy account, and find out, because I've seen this happen. Listen to me. I've seen this happen. I've seen a situation where a web designer, usually a person working on their own, small little company, and maybe they don't even know the legal side of things. And they'll go register your .com for you, and they put their name, their contact info in all three of those contacts. And then all of a sudden, you want to move to another web host. You get sick of that web designer, and you want to take your website and go somewhere else. And that web designer acts all unethical, and he goes, no, you're not leaving. You're not taking anything, because I own the .com. Yeah, it's .com terrorism. They're holding it hostage. Sometimes they'll even hold it for ransom, and they won't let you leave. I'm telling you, you must control your .com. And the only way to know that you are is to make sure that you are the administrative contact. There are also some online scams and mistakes that are out there too. And I need you to be aware of them. There's a ton of them. And I know a lot of people who have lost their .coms by falling for some of this garbage. The biggest one I see is called fake re-registrations. And chances are you've seen this as well. It's normal mail, like the US mail service, like the postal mail. You'll get an official looking letter in the mail, and it will say, hey, the name of our company is Domain Registrations. And we noticed that your .com is about to expire. Now, this could be a total lie. Or there's a way to look up and see when they expire. So maybe they know. But here's the deal. They don't represent where your domain really is. What they're trying to do is steal it. And so they say, we're from Domain Registrations, and the official one for the whole internet. And if you want to re-register it, it'll only be $50 a year. So, and if you give us $1,000, we'll register it forever. They ain't gonna do that. I told you, you can get this done for $5 a year. Okay. And so what ends up happening is, if you sign up for that, they will steal your domain, and they will not give it back until you pay them a lot of money. And that's even if they give it back. I know companies who've had to change. That's right. Change their domain names because they lost it to a poacher. The other kind of mail you will see, and a lot of times this comes through the US mail as well, is there's pressured offerings for non-coms. In other words, I don't see this as much, but I used to see this quite a bit. And you'll also get emails that say this too. It'll start out something like this. We notice that you have your .com, but you don't have the .net version. You don't have the .org version. You don't have the .Australia version, the .China version, the of your own domain name. And if you want to protect your brand, you better get every version of your your whatever. That is stupid. You do not need the .china version. And they'll even try to pressure you by saying something like, oh, we just had someone try to register, and it'll be like ericspellman.ck. If you don't want them to register it, we'll be happy to grab it for you before we actually let them have it. See what they're doing? They're trying to manipulate you into buying worthless domains. Because I'm here to tell you, you don't need your company dot every extension in the world. You don't need it. It's a waste of money, and they're going to charge you a lot more than $5. Also, don't register other people's trademarks. Now, this actually goes back to the early internet. And I tell people all the time, and some of you will giggle and some of you will kind of grimace when I tell you this, but if you ever want to know where the internet's going, if you ever want to know what the newest thing coming technology-wise it's about to come down the internet, believe it or not, there's one industry that kind of leads the way. There's one industry that's ahead of all the others in both what's coming down and stuff like that. And believe it or not, it's the porn industry. Okay. And so that's where this happened. This first legal case occurred there. And someone wanted to label their website, which was a porn site, and they wanted to call it betterthanplayboy.com. That's what they wanted. This is an actual legal case that occurred. I think it was back in the late 90s. There was no precedent on this. There was no legal precedent on this. But in Playboy, because there were a lot of other porn sites out there that were using the term Playboy in their domain name. And so Playboy took them to court. And they had to fight a long time because, like I said, it was new. There was no precedent. No one had ever done this. And believe it or not, Playboy won. And so now the words Playboy, the trademark, if Playboy in this case ever sees any other domain that has Playboy in it, they can have them taken down. Okay. And the way they do that, the way they control that, is the domain registrar like GoDaddy can prevent that from happening. So I'm telling you, don't go out there and get mydisneycollection.com, because trust me, Disney will come after you. Don't do something that is a trademark, because they will come after you. They will sue you to death. And also, even some people get the bright idea, like they see a new company coming down the pike, and so they will register like bitcoin.com or mybitcoin.com or something like that. And then all of a sudden Bitcoin goes crazy, gets a lot of money, and guess what their lawyers do? They trademark Bitcoin, they come after you, and even though you had it first, Bitcoin will win. And keep in mind, what if you had a restaurant and it was called betterthanmcdonalds.com? I guarantee you, McDonald's will come after you. And even if your restaurant was called Better Than McDonald's, they will win. Why? Because sometimes they win simply by outspending you. In other words, they know they're going to lose their cases, but they will keep forcing you into court and forcing you to pay lawyer bills until you just run out of money. They will outspend you. It's think of it as bullying. Okay. And I see it all the time. So just avoid it altogether. Avoid trademarks. Now, what happens if your domain lapses? In other words, what happens if you stop paying $5 a year? Well, what ends up happening is you do get a 30-day grace period. So if your domain expires, let's say July 1, well, what happens is your website and your email stop working as of July 2nd. Okay. You type it in, you won't go anywhere. But no one else can grab it during that time either. You've got 30 days. So you log into your domain, you go pay it up, and then guess what? It starts working again. You have 30 days to do that. But if after 30 days, you don't pay it up, you don't get this fixed, it goes out into the public domain. It goes out into the public market and anyone can grab it. I'm here to tell you, and you got to realize poachers are always watching, and they have little programs that are constantly seeing when domains are about to expire. And there's actually a big market in watching day by day. You can go get a list of all the domains that someone didn't pay for, and they're suddenly available again, and you can go grab them. And what these poachers do is they will go grab them up for $5 a year and then turn around and resell them for a lot more money to someone else. Maybe even back to the original company who didn't realize it had lapsed. I've seen this happen. I've seen this. And there's really nothing you can do. You really have to be in control of your .com. And that's why I tell people you need to register it for multiple years. I tell people if you're planning on being in business forever, don't go register it 1 year at a time, because then every year you're going to have to remember to do that. Go register it for 10 years if you can. I mean, that way you're guaranteed no one is going to just snatch it up because you forgot to pay or because your credit card number changed, you know, and so when it auto renews. Also, never lose your login, like your GoDaddy login or however it's registered. Never lose that. I would almost like, and some of y'all are going to get mad when I tell you this because it kind of goes against the whole cyber security thing. But if you're ever going to write down a username and password, it's going to be this. And I want you to write down your username and password for your domain name, put it in a sealed envelope marked domain access, and then put it in a safe or a safe deposit box or something. Because if you register for 10 years, chances are you're not going to, if you never go to it again, you're not going to remember what your username and password is 10 years from now. So that is one I'm okay with you writing down, but put it somewhere safe, like a safe. Okay, questions on any of this? I know that was a lot, and I hope I didn't scare any of you off with some of those awkward domain names.
Oh, well, I was trying to figure out what they were going to come out to be. So, yeah, that was that was funny. I was going to ask you on when you're like on the auto for your domain for the year, and your credit card, do they not automatically like switch over, or they're just gonna decline you and send you all kinds of messages that, hey, you better get on
what ends up happening is when you enter a credit card or a debit card, you're also entering their expiration date. And so what happens is you'll get an email saying, hey, the credit card we have on file is about to expire. Please log in and update your payment information. You will get a few of those emails. I got 5 because they don't want you to lose it simply because they don't have the right number. And sometimes you just have to enter a new CVC code, you know, on the back, that little 3-digit code. That's all you need to do, especially if the number never changes. But yeah, if you don't go in there and update it, sayonara.
Sayonara. And it's just about sayonara for us. This is your last call for questions. I want to remind everyone to visit nmsvbc.org, where you found how to register for this webinar. I'm just finalizing the webinar calendar for the next month. We have 30 plus webinars for your small business. We have something for everyone. So check it out. And also check out Eric Spellman's webinar that we have up on demand. We also have them on our YouTube channel. So if you want to revisit any topics, he's available. This is it, guys. I don't see anything. So I'll say bye for today. You guys have a great rest of your week. See you later.
Have a good one.
Bye.